I'd like to point out that, Deborah put something in there that said that, she was gonna be verifying against the, our budget before any money is spent, which
Yeah.
is great.
But in the past, also, some of our department heads have felt that if it was in the budget, they had the authority to spend the money.
Well,
And
yeah,
that's not the case.
yeah.
Well, it's the
I
case,
think
but they have to have two
that's
signatures to
okay,
make
by the
sure.
way.
That's right, I mean, in other words, just because it's in the budget, does not necessarily mean it's an approved expenditure. Because the budget is prepared at the beginning of the year, and life can change. And just because it was in that budget does not mean it's approved, so I just don't know how we quite handle that, but I think it's very, very important.
Well, the council approves a budget, which is the policy document that the city manager is responsible
Right.
for. And so that is something that, along with purchasing policies, the city manager does have authority to spend the money that is allocated in the budget. They legally do. Now, the city council also is responsible for giving direction to the city manager, and so if you alter that, you would tell them, and I'm sure they would follow it. But the law does allow for an adopted budget to be the spending plan for the town within the policy document, such as a purchasing
Yeah.
ordinance.
See, I don't like that.
What Jim and I
That's the
are chatting about, and we discussed this with other city managers,
Mhm.
and it's one of our concerns, and I think, of course, obviously we haven't spoken to the council, because this hasn't come up, but, well, it's just like here with the cars, okay? I'll be very specific. The police cars and the motorcycles.
Mhm.
Okay, we agreed to put them in the budget, but even during the discussion, if you check the minutes, we said, but those things won't be bought until you ask us. Next thing you know, we're seeing checks for radios and for motorcycles, or we just hired a police dog, okay? Well, okay, because we had it in the budget, but there's a cost of a police dog. Even if somebody gives us the police dog, there's a fee for an officer that manages it, there are vet bills, there's training bills, there's lots of ancillary costs that go along. Thank you very much for the dog, but the life cycle cost of the dog far outweighs the cost of the dog.
Yeah.
And the council should have, some council members believe that, at the end of the day, our role is to make sure the budget gets met, and we get elected. And we're the ones responsible to the public for it. And so, what Jim is saying, and I heartily agree, and I think that hopefully the people in this room also agree. We're not trying to micromanage, but at the same time, when there's major expenditures, that the council is apprised of that in advance. Normally, it's gonna be, okay, consent.
Well,
See,
and I
let me
think
just explain one other item. We've got an expense budget and we've got a revenue budget. Now, if we just look at the expense budget alone and say that's approval to spend, that doesn't make any sense. Because maybe we're way down in our revenues, in which case we obviously are not meeting the requirements of the total budget. But some of the department heads in the past have said, this is our expense budget, so that's approval to spend. Well, it's not approval to spend. If our revenues are at least as great as the budget forecast, well, that's one thing. Even then, I wouldn't allow spending. But, so I think we need to make that crystal clear, that an expense budget is a strategic piece of paper that says this is what we would like to see.
And I think, I'd like to make a comment. So in the private sector, I completely agree with your analysis. But in the public sector, the practice is that the budget is a policy document that helps the city staff decide, make decisions, and that decision-making is delegated to the city manager or, whoever it's delegated according to policy. So it sounds like we want to make our policies different than kind of what the norm is.
Yep.
So what you and the mayor are suggesting is that we need to establish some policy rules that are different than what's presented here, because you want more things to go to council. And what I explained to the mayor before.
Bill, I don't really think you're saying that. I think if there's a downward revision in revenues, we should revise the budget.
Well, similar to the governor's May revises.
Right, I mean,
And there's
if you
a
got a
purpose.
serious deterioration in revenues.
If I could jump in real quick, and I'd like to hear what Deborah's saying, but I think that I don't think that Jim nor I are saying we want to micromanage everything. But we are saying, and Deborah's been doing, by the way, a very good job in giving us forecasts, and then the next subject item, we're gonna see that she's actually made a better forecast than we've seen in a long time, all of us. And so, we will quickly grow confidence, and so I would think that there'd be maybe some periodic discussions with council where we are, and then budget adjustments. So that wouldn't, so Jim, I would think that just like running the company, the board gives you money, but you come back quarterly and you say, this is how I'm doing, and by the way, this is what's coming up in the future, and it's kind of a reaffirmation. And I think that's more
I never
what we're
managed,
saying, and we
I never
might
managed
see,
companies.
because That's a sign of a well-run organization, whether it's public or private. And
I-
it shows cooperative nature between the electeds and the staff, and I would hope that we could all agree that shows confidence, but it also shows, one team, and that's really what we're supposed to be, one team.
Yeah, and I just think the policy document should be an instruction manual for the staff. So we wanna make sure that this is interpreting what your policy decisions are. And I think if you're purchasing anything, maybe there are clearly 3 categories, right? Sometimes you just go to the dime store and you say, oh, I'm gonna buy that, it's only a couple bucks, and you don't have to check in with your wife or husband to say, I'm gonna spend this money, right? You have an allowance that you're allowed to spend it on. That's kind of the first category. You're gonna be
Right.
smart, you're gonna be frugal, you're gonna get the best product you can, but you don't have to check in with anybody, you have an allowance. And then the second category is, this is a bigger deal, I really need to go out and check with people, I can't just go into one store and think it's a good price, I need to call around, and then I can make a decision.
Well, the next
Now-
one is going on vacation. Can we afford to go to New Orleans? And then the third one, should we buy a new car or a house?
Something like that, right, and so I think the categories are appropriate for a organization to have those 3 categories, because that way they can understand the rules and they can make decisions, but the limits might be something that you want to adjust.
Bill and Jim, I just think that you should decide whether you wanna cut the line on the city council approving purchases. That's the most key decision. Once you make that decision, you're pretty well delegating to the city manager, particularly, and in some cases, the finance director, the responsibilities for buying the other stuff if it's authorized generally in the budget. I mean, you gotta set your threshold. If you wanna set it at $1,000, so be it. But I think that's the threshold. I don't think it should be $1,000, and I'm not sure. It depends on how many of these items you have a year.
Well, we don't want to constipate the organization.
Well, that's what I think.
And I think that you've talked about not wanting to micromanage, but the tone sounds a lot like micromanaging, and I think,
It's all getting down to the limits, I think.
I think that's
Well,
right.
I think you need to focus on one thing, the
The
limit.
thing is this, and part of it is we have to learn, we have to get confidence in the people that we have here, and I think that, I think Jim, we have a lot of confidence in the guys that we have here. We're hoping that over time they'll stay, and we also need to give limits that are reasonable,
Yeah.
that will serve to allow us to attract a reasonable person who wants to come in here. But again, there's very little money. If you look at our fund, very little, $2 million, a little bit more than that actually, if you do the calculation, is really spent on capital costs. Or is spent. The rest of it goes to people costs. And so we're really managing, where do we want to draw the line on spending our quote-unquote $2 million, and how big a chunks do we want to let it go with just, we saw it in July, and we see it in January, and then that's it, and let people get on with business, or how much do we want to be notified? And that's why I came up with my limits that were a little bit lower, but the informal versus formal, I agree. And I think budget checks and budget realignment, Jim, are exactly spot on where we want to be.
Yeah, I have no problem with your limits, Bill, I think they're all right. I'm just saying that, again, to talk about budget, you make a budget, which in this case is for at least 6 months. And there's no way we know what's gonna happen in 6 months. In the private sector, the way I've always managed is I managed on a forecast, not on a budget. Because on a forecast, you have a much better idea what's really gonna happen than in a budget. Now, I don't know if we can do that or not, but that certainly is a much better way of running an organization in my mind than a budget, which is so far out. Things can change, who knows, and you still get into the arguments with the people who work here and said, oh, but it's in the budget. I mean, I had one the other day, was when somebody came to me and I said, why are you spending this amount of money? And they said, well, it's in the budget. And I thought to myself, well, it makes sense.
Well, you gotta rely on the judgment. You gotta rely on the judgment of your people. If you're gonna second guess them, then you need to put that in their review. I wouldn't try and micromanage them. If they're making mistakes, then you should review that in their performance, but you've gotta delegate a certain level of confidence and.
I agree.
And I think you guys need to decide where that is. You're saying 15,000, Bill? Did you make the 50,000 proposal?
I put in the proposed limits column.
And what
It's
did
the
you,
50.
what did you base the 50,000 on?
Like I said, the kind of the industry standard of people that are updating their ordinances right now, that's.
What size
the
cities? I think it makes a difference in the size of the city.
It's different size cities.
Well,
Some
but
small.
50,000, that's quite a jump from what it was before.
Yes.
15, I mean, is that, how many are we talking about? How many purchases do we have over 50,000 a year?
A lot of them are.
That's one question that I had asked as well, that's a good question.
Oh, we have in the Public Works Department, we have
Yeah,
a
but we're
lot
not-
of, way over 50.
Oh, yeah, but
Well,
we're
I'm
not
just
talking
saying-
about public works at the
Well,
moment.
that's a different category, isn't
Oh,
it?
yeah,
all right.
Okay, let's, okay. So, and then
And
the other interesting observation too is that even though, you have proposed current limits, I thought it was interesting reading the procedure that, it's not limited, I mean, it's like per department, 5,000 limit per month, actually. So it's more, I think, am I wrong? It's more generous than it appears on paper, so.
Well, we talked about, that was for the credit cards.
Yeah, that's
right. Is that- it's just for credit card?
Up to 5,000, and I
Mhm.
think I recommended that we put the city, the monthly limit down to 3,000. But if somebody spends 3,3,3,3,3, then we probably ought to wonder what's going on.
Yeah.
But credit cards, as Jim knows, has been a big issue.
Well, and I think, part of what you're looking at there is patterns, and then you have to really address that. I think your analysis, Bill, that we're really only, we're talking about $2 million being the amount of the overall budget that falls kind of into this area that we're discussing. Isn't it also accurate that the bulk of our revenue that would cover that $2 million is really pretty consistent? That the sources of our revenue, they're kind of long-term trends, but we don't have in the overall revenue for the town, we don't have abrupt changes in revenue.
I mean,
Am I accurate on that?
Over the last 3 years, I mean, the town of Atherton has over 70% in property tax, which is the most stable revenue source there is. However, over the last couple of years, it's been in jeopardy. Here, we're also we're on the teeter plan, which means whatever the assessor says your property tax is, you're going to get it. So you're not, subject to delinquencies and all that kind of stuff. But, the county assessor did have a decline in assessed value 1 year. But you're right, it's very stable, very stable. However, the state has been messing with our revenue for the last, 5 to 10 years. And so they're always just stealing money out of,
Yeah. We're
different
taking
places
our
and trading it
property
around.
taxes.
So that, and cities are very aware of that. And so I know here, right, you adopted a budget in June, you revised it in September, and you're having a mid-year review in March. And so there is a practice with government of coming back to the legislative body and saying, hey, we're not gonna get all of our sales tax that we thought, or there's a problem
And I
with
think that's
property
where you should
tax.
exercise your change,
Or the
Jim, not in
state's-
the day-to-day stuff. I mean,
Well-
you gotta give
We
the
can adopt
staff
some budget
opportunity to do their
policies.
job.
Yeah,
You
that's
set the
fine.
ballpark and the rules, and they'll follow. If they don't follow them, it affects their performance, and then you can look at that from a
Yeah, I
performance.
think Greg's spot on. I want to make a comment in support of you. From the operational standpoint, Bill, on the phone, is that you need a cultural change to address that situation you had the other day, and that's part of the management of this town, is to put in place with the staff. Just because it's there, you have to realize this is taxpayers' money, and you need to think about, do you really need to spend this? And I think you need some kind of a cultural change from the top up, which would support Greg's point, because you definitely don't wanna have to micromanage these people and say, if you spend $3,000, you're gonna get, we want to look at. I think the proposed limits are fine, and as you all know, on the audit committee, I was a big proponent of cutting off the credit cards and doing all that kind of
Proposed
stuff.
limits, Jim, I'm not sure which ones you're talking about.
The mayor's proposed, the ones you proposed are fine, the limits are, and I also think I personally like the two signature, so there is an audit trail, as Greg said, from his experience, and I totally agree.
Yeah.
You need to find out where it started from.
Well, can you give us some idea of the volume here we're talking about? You only got $2 million. There can't be more than 10 items a year that are 50,000, is there?
In the professional services category, the contracts are becoming fairly large because we're doing annual contracts for different things. But I will say, in the supplies and equipment and materials, it is very low volume because we're not, we don't have a courtyard that's stockpiling different things. We usually go out and buy it as part of the construction contract. If we're doing asphalt, we're doing it as part of the construction contract, so.
Do you have any idea how many items the board would have to review if we set it at 15,000?
I have it on my desk.
Well, it's close by, I get it.
Let me go grab it and keep talking.
But that's really what we're talking about. We burden the board by you approving 200 items a month. That's ridiculous.
Well,
So we gotta get a judgment of how many items are there. And make it reasonable. Well, that's what we need to know what the facts,
than they have ever been.
and if it's 20 a month or 10 a
I
month,
would say for the council, based on my experience, if it was 20 a month, that would be an awful lot.
that's right, and that's,
In fact, I think probably more like 10 a month.
So, we looked at she looked at a city that's had a stable, and other cities that have had stable city management. They've grown over time. They're substantially larger. I'm not so sure that today we're ready for those. That's why I came up with the lower limits, but they're higher than what we're.
well, I'm not even sure, where are we on the city manager? Do we have
A
one
year
there?
ago. So that shows.
We have an interim?
Yeah, so
Well,
my
Teresa is
view
here.
was.
Does she have the
hey,
authority of the
let's
city
build
manager?
some trust.
Why
We
isn't
have
she
to
here?
change all these limits right now. We should build some trust and then go forward.
She
I
would
And
have,
just
we need to make sure that fraud
She had
can't
a
happen.
lot of
We've got to.
Say again?
she had another meeting that she had to attend.
What
I
was it?
explained earlier, I think we need to look at things.
Well, I think she should be here. We're talking about her
that are
job.
full all the time.
That job. We're talking about
And if
that
we do
job.
that, then we'll
That's
have
the key
a
job.
process, And we'll have limits.
And
that
what,
we
and her
don't-
input is important. If she's gonna function, then she's gotta have input to us.
Teresa's doing an awful lot right at the moment.
Well, I don't know, but I think that's what we're talking about, the city manager's job, whether it's Teresa or somebody else.
Well, Teresa's doing a great job. She's questioning, like, maintenance. She told me the other day, she's asked maintenance contracts. She says, how do we know that this has even happened? Does anybody ever really check this? We just sign off on it. So she is actually going in and asking very good questions on this stuff, and
Right, well, we need to give her a reasonable amount, I mean, and that's why this limit thing, we need to figure out, what is your answer on the limits?
Well, over $5,000, this is the list of purchase orders in 2011. So the median price of a purchase order was $4,900, the average was $17,000. So the contracts over 50,000, there were 8 different contracts that
All
are
right,
listed.
over 25,000, how many were there?
Let's see, I have over 15,000, I don't think I did over.
All right, how many over
5,000.
15?
24
For the year?
out of a total of like 100, yeah.
So the board would only look at,
2 a month.
2 a month? Hey, well, then that's fine,
and it would
15,000 is
probably
fine.
be on the consent calendar unless it was poorly written. Okay?
Well, I don't have any problem with
We haven't
15,000, in
seen
fact,
any of those
if it's only 2 a month,
Got-
if you wanna lower it, fine, but I think 15 is fine, it's 2 a month, that's unreasonable.
I think, Greg, here's what I believe. We've had a lot of trouble in the past on different things, not just on purchasing, where things weren't written down. So when we tried to enforce certain disciplines, people would come up and say, well, that's not what's in the procedure.
Well, that's
And
fine, that's
therefore,
what we're here about today.
We're here today to try to get, not everything, but to try to get as much written down as possible. That does not mean that we don't trust our employees. But you know, my old saying is, trust but verify. And I think that what we're trying to do is to take as much away from judgment as we can without, and as I say, constipating the organization, so that people can look at this and know exactly what they can do from a job viewpoint.
Well, Bill, if it's 15,000, there's only 24 a year, I mean, let's go with it, let's,
Yeah,
why talk about
Hey, that's
it?
great.
I agree, totally agree.
Right, okay.
Okay, good.
I mean, that's fine, you guys are gonna, under 15,000, you ought to be able to trust the city manager to make sure the procedures are followed, under 15,000.
When we get together.
And the auditors will tell you if they're not,
Yeah.
I mean, if they're violating
I
the
have no
rules.
problem with them.
Yeah.
So I move that we accept the 15,000 limit on both the last two categories, or the informal procedures, free rate close, and the formal procedures, 15,000. Do you wanna make that 10 instead of 15 on the second tier? You know, you get,
Let me pull it up again, hold on.
Okay, I think
mean,
something has.
I'm willing to go with lower levels. I was trying to, kind of give kind of a vote of confidence that I think we can.
well, there's only two a month.
But I'm
I mean, we're
happy
not-
to keep the limits where they are, really.
I think 15 is all right.
All right, 15's fine, that's where it is now.
Let's
Although it
go with-
says the current limit is 5 to 15, I don't know what that means.
I think that's what Bill meant to put in his column there, 5 to 15, because the first level goes up to 5,000, and then it would be 5 to 15, and then anything
Oh, I see,
greater than
I see, it's a
15,
I
range,
think we
5
need
to
to
15.
Greater than
Confirm that.
15.
And when you look at
So
it,
he's
it's,
proposing the current.
Yeah, you mean 5 to 15, Bill, because we've got a procedure for 5
Because
and,
each one builds on the other one, so
Yeah.
it'd really be
Yeah.
5,000, 1 to 15.
And then the last
So-
one is
fine.
greater.
so the
it's the same as
recommendations
the
are more
current.
in line with the current limits, there's no, very little change, except for that first category, 1,000 to 750.
Well, and then I made some greater processes and understand that there's still discussion on informal versus formal, but if we have the three categories in the public works, I thought that the upper limits, because when you're doing something on a street or you're doing a major repair, you don't get that done for $10,000.
My feeling is, let's go with them. Let's go with your limits, Bill, and then 3 months from now, we can review them and see how it's working.
Well, I would say we should review, I recommend that we would look at them after we get a city manager in place and we've run with him for about 6 months.
Or her.
Or it could be, yes, exactly, it could be Teresa.
well, and I do think we only meet once a month or once or twice every 2 months. I think the city manager should be here. Because I remember 2 meetings ago, when John wasn't here, we talked the whole meeting about his job and he wasn't here.
Well, okay.
And I think that we just waste our time and his, because we make a bunch of decisions, he comes back and says, that's ridiculous.
I'll pass that on.
Okay, that's a good point, but I think right now Teresa is we've got a lot going on. She's kind of working lots of hours, as everybody in the city is, and so, I'd appreciate it if we wait till we get a full-time city manager. I think that's my recommendation to you, but obviously, the group, the audit committee, finance committee could decide.
Well, I'm voting no on any issue that affects the city manager that's significant when they're not here.
Okay.
Well, I would say, when the full-time city manager is here, I agree with you, Greg. At the moment, I know what Teresa's doing. She's doing sort of 2.5 jobs, and actually she's doing both of them pretty damn well in my mind. So I'm not gonna.
I have no reason to think she's not doing a great job, I just think it's appropriate that she be here to fit
Well,
certain
I'm just
positions.
saying, at the moment, I think she's done
All right, that's
totally
fine, I
up to date with what we're doing here. Deborah will bring her up to date. I doubt that she'll have any real disagreements.
So do we wanna approve each of these sections?
Well, if you wanna just go ahead and approve, if the agreement is to stay with the mayor recommended, you can go do that. If you wanna go with, stay with them as is, you can do that in a blanket.
Well,
You, Jeff.
Well, we've just talked about goods and supplies. I'm wondering if we wanna approve what we've just discussed. I think Greg made a motion on that.
Yeah, on
then-
goods and
then-
supplies, let's go over that, and then we can move the other two and move quickly here.
Alright, so, okay, can you make again very clearly?
We'll go with the mayor's recommendation on the goods and supplies.
As
As
modified
proposed.
so that informal is 5 to 15. And I'll second that.
And
Well,
the
you
last
can't
one, formal is
second
greater,
it,
15 and
not on the
greater,
audit
we need to,
committee.
Well, I thought this was both committees, so I apologize.
No, it's
no, just
not,
audit.
only the audit committee.
Then why is the finance committee here?
Well,
It's
because
a
we
joint
have another
meeting.
item that is gonna be finance committee.
We're trying to be
only,
efficient.
but
All right.
Whichever has limited time, so we wanted to have both.
I'll second.
Got it.
I'll second.
Okay.
We got a second.
I'm sorry, I missed that earlier. I withdraw my second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
None.
All right, on the professional contracts situation, there's only, the main difference between you and the current limits is on the open market proposals. You're going from up to and including $750 to up and including $5,000, Bill?
Well, I was trying to throw a bone, you know, I'm willing to stay at 750. I think it should be at least 1,000 personally, because you can't get somebody in for less than $100 a day. And so we need to bring in a temp per day, it's $800 right there.
Well, then I put 1,000 in,
All right, make it 1,000, okay? I
instead
agree.
of 5,000.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, I move that we prove it, as mayor's proposing, changing the 5,000 to 1,000 on the open market proposals.
I'll second that one too.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
All right, on the public works, your big change here is on the, formal biddings required, you're saying that you're going up to 25,000 from 5?
Well, my point was, things for public works generally, and the things that are in that category, generally are more expensive, and they involve a lot of heavy material, heavy equipment, those type of things. And I thought that we should probably, Duncan had a good point, and actually, since we never got around to 3.17, I can tell you secretly, I was going to actually rewrite it to increase those limits anyway. That was my recommendation back a year or so ago.
So Duncan's proposal, I think, had formal bidding over 100,000.
Guys, I understand that, but I wasn't gonna give him that.
Okay.
My own feeling
Well, what are
is,
you guys comfortable with on the formal bidding? 25 or?
I think we should go with 25, but if you guys wanna stay where we are, then I'm not gonna.
Well, how many contracts a year do we have greater than 5,000?
Well, public works contracts, it would be a great
yeah,
advantage
I would
to have a higher
increase that,
limit.
I would increase that to at least 50,000.
50, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like the numbers I proposed, obviously I proposed.
How many a year? Do you have any idea?
Over 50 or 100?
Well, the public works contracts that come to the city, I mean, I think almost all of them have to be over 25,000. You can't really do anything for less than that.
Yeah, but this is, remember, 25.
But again, we're only talking about 1 or 2 a month, aren't we?
Oh, but the formal bidding requires the advertising and the, and
It's a
sealed
very
bids, and it's a big,
time-consuming process.
big deal.
So
Big deal.
it
Yes.
is a big deal. It's not just how many has to go to council. It's a very labor-intensive process.
Yeah, Bill, and you're really creating a burden for 25,000, you're doing the
These should
same.
be these should be very specific projects that get budgeted, the council should know about, and it's a heck of a lot of money. It's street paving, things like that, and the council needs to, you know, to be informed of these things, because that's the big chunk of
Well, at
money.
25,000, you could almost do an automobile on that, couldn't you?
Well, no, you can't buy an automobile, that's in goods and services, but you can't buy it in public works, no, you can't buy an automobile here.
Well, it seems like 25 is still pretty low,
No, I think, but okay, we can always change it later.
what do you think, Jim?
50, I think 50.
I would go with 50 if it were me.
Yeah, I'll go with 50.
Why don't we got a good quorum here, we got a majority here that wants to go with 50, Bill, can you handle
Well,
it?
is it a majority of people who are proper to vote on it, or is it?
It's
just-
unanimous.
It's unanimous.
It's unanimous.
yeah, the finance committee guy didn't say anything.
Here's what I would like to say, okay, if I could.
All right, I recommend we go
I'd
with,
like to see a Pareto on the type of bids that we've done this year, and see where the break point is, and if it's at 50, then fine, if it's not at 50, then we should go with 25.
She's-
Well, you know, we haven't had time to.
hey, well, she's looking at it right now, hang on a second.
I'm looking at the purchase orders issued in 2011,
Yeah,
and there's a Jensen Landscaping for 70,000, Bortolo, no, that's not how you say it. Bortolato for 106,000. Neil Martin is a professional services contract, but that's over 100,000. Redwood Construction is 350. So the construction, the things that qualify under public works projects are generally going to be large construction projects. The times that they fall under that is when you're required by the code to do, formal bidding for maintenance type things, which could be like painting of city hall,
Yeah,
right? And then if the number's low, then you have to go through this formal bidding process, invite everybody that might put in a bid that might not be the best quality. Sometimes that's happened to me before. But I think in general, over 50,000, all of your big public work contracts are going to be greater than 50,000. Any kind of paving, any kind of construction project.
It's okay, Bill?
Yeah, I can give it on that one.
All right, what's when we vote? I move and
Second.
second, we gotta,
well, hold on a minute.
Wait, yeah.
I have one other item on public works contracts. I think the approval requirements should also include the finance director.
I agree with that. In fact,
I agree with that.
oh yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah.
on all of those.
Yeah, and I guess I left that off because
I
the
think that
state
was
code
the mistake
doesn't
that was in
require
here,
it.
but the understanding was to be two signatures on it.
Yeah, the finance director is required to sign off on all purchase orders, which are all things over $1,000, so
But
yes,
we
I'll
need
put
to
it
add-
on.
It's automatic.
Put it on all
Yeah,
of
I'll
them.
You might as well put it on the previous one too.
Right.
And everything.
I'll put it on all of those.
So we go back and amend that previous motion on professional contracts to include,
And when you add to that, 2 signatures
Two signatures.
on each one of those, so that people recognize that and doesn't mean or.
Okay, that's not a problem, okay.
and then we're going with 50,000 instead of 25, so you modify those last 2 lines, informal bidding and formal bidding up to 50.
10 to 50 and then 50.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
all right.
very good.
Is that enough for you?
That is very, very helpful, very helpful.
So
And you might sit down with Teresa, make sure she agrees,
I will
and if she's got any
absolutely do
problems,
that.
we can have a special meeting to address it.
Okay,
all right,
that is very, very helpful. So if anybody had any other comments that they wanted to make on it, I think Bill and I were gonna go through the language detail and make sure that,
you know, I have
We work
to
through any
tell
issues
you, I
he
have
has.
not gone through every paragraph on this.
Is there anything you want us to look at specifically that is controversial?
Well, I could point out some things I made comments on, and there's been no feedback, per se, but, in the public service thing, there was automatic increases in that, and my recommendation was we take those things out, that the limits are the limits, and if we need to amend.
Public service, what is that? Where is that?
so under professional services contracts, there were limits that are set according to this table that you just agreed to. But then the language in there on page, say 12, states that every 5 years, the limits can go up by $2,000. So it's kind of just putting in like a little bit of a CPI under 2% a year, but it
No, I
only
take-
changes
take
every
that
5
out.
years. Yeah, Bill
Take
wanted me
that
to take that out, that's fine. Just
Yeah.
wanted to give you some options for
You know,
other
there's a
agencies
question
are
on
doing.
the informal versus formal, we need to just kind of wring that out. There was a thing where we're gonna amend, the RFPs that need to get, if they're over the limit of the city manager, the RFPs need to be approved by the council, so that the council actually, because sometimes RFPs come out, and then the RFPs, actually dictate the terms of the contract, and then the council says, hey, I'd like to have this term in there, and it can't get in, because you gotta rebid it.
Now, what do we do on amendments to contracts for add-ons? And they go,
Right, so, and then we've also said, if we're gonna change anything in a deal, that the council has to reapprove it. So if the council approves something and now and it had to approve it, and then the city manager and the contractor want to change it, one of my recommendations for discussion is that I think the council should be asked again to reapprove it. We shouldn't have a unilateral, somebody gets something approved and then it could be changed.
well, I think though you need to look at the situation where you're under the limit. Let's say it's 50,000. You have a contract that goes out for 45,000, and they come back for a $10,000 add-on. Does that go to the council?
Yes,
Absolutely.
but you gotta look at the total cost.
Well, that's the,
No, well, the committee members,
That's what I would recommend.
Greg is suggesting that the limit would still be under 50,000.
well, no, I'm not suggesting, I'm addressing this as an issue. I don't know what the answer is.
Well, I
If it
think,
was over 50,000, it has to go to the.
right, if, the way the ordinance is written, and Bill and I have a little bit of a disagreement with some of these things, I'll tell you what that is in a minute. But if it has to, if it exceeds the limit, even in a change order,
Yeah.
It
That's the
has to go
issue.
to council.
That-
Now, if there's a contract that's approved under the limit by the city manager and the finance director, and then there's a change order, but it's still below the limit for council authority, then
That's
the
fine.
practice would be that it wouldn't have to go to council unless there's like a significant change in the scope that the council had approved. Right, but if it hadn't been a council-approved contract, then the city manager
Well, the
still has
council didn't
authority.
approve it to start with.
Exactly, well, it didn't go over the limit.
Right, if it didn't go.
Well,
over-
but I think if you got change orders that go over the limit, at a minimum, I think the council should approve it, because
Yes.
otherwise, you can have 10 contracts for.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you know, we had that one, Jim knows very well, we had one, now obviously it went to the council to start with, but there was add-ons and add-ons and add-ons.
No, I think if you add on to exceed the limit, they have to go back and get city council.
And that's on page 13B here, that is listed there. The city manager may award any contract for professional services not to exceed the amount of, and we'll put in 25,000. Any contract having a total contract amount greater than 25 goes, and then it talks about change orders too in here. Oh, the next section down here, 316-210, amendments to
Right.
professional services contracts, and that says exactly what you stated. If it goes above the limit, it has to go to council.
Right, and so the other two things on this page is C, I'd like to talk to Deborah
that's good.
and
That's good, Jim.
and Teresa with regards to, you know, the fact that you read C, it says that if there's a vacant position, somebody quits, the town manager can just go ahead, it says, well, with a budgeted position, we're just gonna hire somebody in. And I don't know if that, so we could effectively, you know, start changing out our staff. And I think that the council should, at some level, be able to weigh in on that, but I'd like to hear other people's opinion. And then also on the donated goods and services, 316-220, is that, I think my recommendation was that we would look at the total cost of ownership, like I mentioned earlier today with regards to bringing in a police dog. You know, we gotta look at the total cost of ownership, and if it exceeds the purchasing authority of the person who's accepting the donation, then the council needs to be advised to approve it.
Well, the council has talked about this,
Actually, the accepting things and then have maintenance, terrible maintenance issues and all sorts of ancillary costs that are going to impact our budget for years to come.
Yeah, that's a good addition, I
yeah,
think.
I have no problem with that, Bill, but I think also